Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. This is the NFL edition of our Experts Guide to Betting series. I'm your host, Maria Marino. Excited to be joined by NFL betting experts Chris Raybon and Stuckey. Fellas, how we doing?
Doing as good as we can be doing with no football, but it's coming. It's only about a week away.
Stuck.
For me, got a little more time. I don't get involved in preseason. I don't have any time, although we probably will talk about that during this episode. There's definitely some opportunities during preseason. I'm just way too busy with college football and NFL prep, but it's in the air. Football is in the air. Got a couple college football podcasts I'm recording later today. Quick shameless plug for Big Bets on Campus. Yes. If you don't listen to that. And yeah, I'm excited to run this back with Raybon on for another full season. Should be fun.
Maria, I can't believe we're like a minute into the pod and Stuckey is already committing blasphemy by saying he doesn't get involved with preseason when his favorite team does nothing but cover every preseason. I think the Ravens have covered for 5 straight preseasons in a row now. Like, you just bet the Ravens. That's all you have to do, stuff. Like,
yeah, we could end this tip betting tip show right there. Just bet the Ravens in the preseason.
Yeah.
And then retire for the year, go away, and then do it again the next year. Because all they do is cover. So I've missed out on some money there for sure.
So like a minute into this podcast and we've already covered so much. We've got a plug for BBOC. We got a teaser for how to prep in the preseason. I do want to remind you, though, that Chris and Stuck will be bringing you our flagship NFL betting preview episodes here on the Action Network podcast every Thursday this fall for a 5th consecutive season. Wow, you guys are vets. And before we actually get into all the best practices for betting NFL, I do want to lay out sort of your qualifications and what makes each of you an expert betting this sport. So, Raybon, we'll start with you. How long have you been betting NFL? How often do you bet during the year? And anything else you want to add?
So I've been watching every snap of every game since 2010, betting since the mid-2010s, 143, 70, and 2, 67%. Last season, overall, over the past 5 seasons, I've logged just over 1,300 bets and won at a 57% clip. But most importantly, I know Stuckey's going to tell you he's been betting since like the 90s. And I just want everybody to know that I've beat him 2 of the last 3 times in our podcast. So whatever qualifications he has, I'm just going to piggyback off that.
Stuckey, your response?
That's well, I will say one NFL season, very, very small sample size, which but I like getting the competitive juices going before this season. We'll definitely have a big wager on the line that we can maybe pay off on another long night out in New York City if Raybon will show up for the second night. I've been betting NFL every week for I guess over 20 years now, since high school. I will say that I think in the app, let me check, I have since the origin of the app, I don't know, about 7.5% ROI, I think, with like close to 1,500 bets. Pretty much no props, but we'll get to talk about props where you can find probably the most value in the NFL. I will say that for the first 7 to 8 years through high school, through college, I was not making money betting the NFL. And it was actually more beatable then, in my opinion. But I, just was making dumb bets, parlays, pleasers, which are like reverse teasers. And it was pretty much in all my betting outside of college basketball. But, you get, like I said, one season is very small sample size in the NFL. Like there's only so many games and there's only so many Sundays. It's not like a college basketball, baseball, NBA where the amount of bets that you're going to make during a season trumps what you're going to do in the NFL. So you kind of want to get a pretty large sample size over a couple seasons, at least at the minimum, to see where you're strong and where you're not. And once I started, tracking all of my bets, I realized some of the things that I was doing wrong, which we'll touch on throughout this episode. But yeah, pretty much betting NFL over 20 years now, every week, and grew up playing football, love the sport, and excited to get after it. It never, the fun of it, and the challenge never gets old to me. And nothing better than an NFL Sunday wire-to-wire action on your couch or at the bar, wherever you're at, for 12 hours. So yeah, I've been in the game for a while, but many have been in it longer, and just trying to adapt and adjust over time.
Wow, I feel like you sold it right there in that phrase, that the fun never gets old. Also appreciate you pointing out the humble beginnings. I think that's super relatable. And I just got to say, Raybon, bring in receipts with the numbers and the records and every snap of every game since 2010. Very impressive. I'd say based on that, you guys are probably the most qualified of any of our experts guides that we've done so far. I feel like I'm not going out on a limb saying that. So here's the question, how can a regular listener out there actually become good at betting NFL just generally? Raybon, we'll start with you.
So I got three things if we're going to keep it general. The first thing is target underdogs and unders, because what usually happens is the majority of the public is going to bet on favorites, and the majority of the public's going to bet on overs. It's been about 60% for both. The favorite's gotten the majority of the money over 60% of the time, and so do the overs. So you're going to get a little bit of line value just by kind of focusing on those as it is. And it's a lot, especially with underdogs in the NFL, it's a lot easier to pick a team that, maybe can keep it closer than to pick a team to not only win, but then to win by a certain margin. That's just, I've always found that more difficult because there's a lot of regression in luck and things like that in the NFL. So underdogs and unders, my number one thing. Number two, it's kind of along those same lines. It's you generally want to be on the opposite side of the public. So, we can track the bets and money in the Action Network app. So you can see, for example, okay, the Chiefs are getting 80% of the bets and 82% of the money. When you're betting, you generally want to be on the other side of that. Even if you are betting a favorite, you don't want to be betting, let's say, like a public underdog or something like that. Usually that line is going to be inflated because, the books are taking a lot of money on it, and they're going to move the line accordingly, and you're not really going to get any value. And then the third thing is it's very important in the NFL because the NFL is a very, very sharp market. A ton of money comes in every week on the NFL. It's pretty much the most popular sport at every sports book. So what you have to do is you have to line shop and get the best of the line, which it means I would recommend having multiple sportsbook accounts, because you're going to be looking for, a half point here, half point there. And those things are going to add up, especially if you can get it on a key number, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think line shopping is crucial. So underdogs and unders, fading the public, and line shopping.
Wow, great breakdown. And I think the Action app is definitely a great way to line shop. That's one of the benefits of using the Action app. Of course, you can follow both of these guys in there. Once again, it's Chris, Raybon, and Stuckey. I'm in the app as well, but I'm very selective with my bets, so we'll see what I throw in there. But Stuck, was there anything else you wanted to add, just in terms of for a regular, average person, casual fan, maybe, of the NFL to become good at betting it?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for just an average recreational bettor to become good at betting NFL. It's a super efficient market, but there are things that you can do. Number one, get rid of all the dumb bets that you make. If you want to do some for fun and it's just for entertainment, you have to remember that. Great. You want to put in your 8 to 10 team parlays, your same game parlays, fine. But if you want to actually get better and improve your ROI, get rid of those. But I think the best thing that you can do as a recreational bettor is, speaking of the Action app, find someone that you trust with a proven track record. And this is why, you're going to, if you go on Twitter or wherever, you're going to have a lot of people claiming that they're great at betting and beat the NFL. There's not many who do, and that's why tracking is so important. Find someone with an established track record that you can follow. And also, you want to bet early in the week. And as Raybon said, you want to shop around, get the best of the number. It's the easiest thing you can do to improve your ROI. So that's just having as many outs as possible. Half point here or there. that will add up over time. Also, as Raybon alluded to, huge money in the NFL, super efficient market. There are enormous groups betting just insane amounts of money, but a lot of that has to be filled later in the week, on the weekend. So early in the week, the market is going to be softer. You're a recreational bettor. There's more opportunities there. It's, you don't have to worry about limits or, moving the market. But you want to bet early in the week and track your bets. Like, just going back to the action, that over time, you'll see, am I good? Am I not? If I'm not, where are my weaknesses? Is it totals? Is it sides? Am I doing you'll see, am I doing too many parlays? Am I good in teasers? So there are also some softer markets out there with like teasers that you can potentially bet before getting limited. And then the prop betting. We'll talk about that. Raybon can especially speak to that. And if you don't follow him and Sean Kerner, you'll see their props when they release them move immediately, like, sometimes 6-7 yards on like a wide receiver prop. That shows you that the market is a lot more inefficient, and odds makers aren't spending as much time on there because there's lower limits, and you can't possibly spend all this time nailing every single player prop, and they're not really worried about that because the limits are much lower. But if you're a recreational bettor, you don't have to worry about those limits. So attack the prop betting market, follow people who are good there, and then notifications on the app. You got to be quick. Those yards, just like those half points, they add up. Again, shop around, best of number. That comes down to having multiple outs, and by outs I mean just as many accounts or sports books as you possibly can. And then, especially if you're in a new state, take advantage of those bonuses. That's just free money out there that you're leaving on the table if you don't.
And one thing I want to add to what Stuckey said, that was a great breakdown. And when he said, tracking, one thing that I would also mention is track the bets that you thought about making but didn't make. Because I know a lot of people, especially when they're just getting into betting, they're kind of on the fence and they're like, maybe I should have bet that. And then, if it hits, they regret not betting it. And, that might make them, tilt or bet more next time. So track the bets you don't make as well, just to see, were you on the right track or were you better off for staying away? So, track as much as you can. And I think the non-bets are part of that.
Yeah, because people have selective memory. I do it myself. I will look at a card, and regardless of sport, and I'll say to myself, it's just all this is psychological cognitive biases. I'll say, oh man, I would have bet that, and that are winners. And then, the ones that are losers, I'll say to myself, you know what, but I kind of didn't like this side because of that. Like you can convince yourself that you should have hit this on a Sunday night. You weren't going to hit that if it didn't hit. So you can really get yourself in trouble psychologically. That goes back to, trying to avoid tilt, chasing. Those are the bad things. And that's, a lot of bettors are vulnerable here because of the way the NFL is structured. You have your early slate on Sunday, your late slate, then your Sunday night game and your Monday night game. A lot of people call them your chaser specials. So if you're, kind of vulnerable to, tilting, chasing, all the things that bettors really should just that get most people in trouble. If you think about it, if I always use this analogy, but I asked my little sister to make my bets for an entire season, and she just flipped a coin. I'm just going to juice out. I'm not going to get in too much trouble. I'm going to hit, just 50% over a long period of time. But why do people get in much more trouble? It's all of those behavioral finance issues, chasing on the Sunday night game, Monday night game. So if, you're vulnerable to those things, that put your Sunday night and your Monday night bet in before your Sunday slate starts. Also, going back to what we said, if you're betting those games right before kick, that's the most efficient number out there. So betting those games early to avoid potential chasing and getting yourself in a hole you can't get out of is something that a recreational bettor can do to just avoid those issues.
It's such a great idea to track even the bets that you're thinking about, because it's all about that accountability piece. That's how you're, in my opinion, ultimately going to become successful. And I want to take this a step further. I think some of the, pillars for betting NFL might be kind of obvious because people are so familiar with the NFL stuff. You brought up the schedule before, but is there anything that, we might not be thinking of that's obvious in terms of just the basics that you got to know going in, Raybon?
Yeah, so I think there are a ton when you talk about pillars, and the thing you have to keep in mind throughout all of this, like the one pillar, if there's one, is you have to find an edge compared to the market. The market is going to have what it thinks should be the true line, and you have to find an edge in the sense that you think that the true line is off from the market's line. So the first thing, you need a way to quantify that, for whatever you're betting. So if you're betting sides, for example, you need a way to say, okay, this team is X amount of points better than the other team. Now, it could be as simple as, some people just do it in their heads. They just eyeball it. Some people would look at something as simple as like a team score, average points or average point differential. Maybe you schedule adjust it, obviously regress it to the mean somewhat, but you could go advanced too. You could go with a more complex metric, like, taking like a DVOA or yards per play or EPA and converting that to points. But whatever you do, you need a way to just know what the real line should be. And then you need to know how to, what your edge is going to be. So an edge can come from a variety of things that the market may not have fully factored in or even accounted for at all. But, injuries are some. So you always want to keep that injury report and that practice report during the week in mind. Situational spots, a team coming off a blowout, tends to play better. A blowout loss, that is, tends to play better the next week. Teams that blow out teams tend to have letdowns the next week. Rest, different amounts of rest will factor in, especially teams coming off a bye. That's extra preparation. Thursday night, shorter rest. That means the better team, it usually benefits the better team. That's why favorites tend to do better on Thursdays. But like some of the edges that I tend to look for that I don't think the market fully factors in, even beyond the things I just mentioned, pressure. I think it's really hard to quantify pressure, but it now with all the advanced metrics we have, we definitely can do it. And, if there's a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, I usually bet against him when he's going up against a defense that could get pressure. Or, when a team usually when a defense doesn't get much pressure, but the opposing quarterback just isn't really good, great from a clean pocket, so it doesn't really matter. Things like that go beyond just, two power ratings or whatever, that wouldn't capture all the nuances, specific matchups, maybe wide receiver cornerback or something like that, that would take away a key part of the other team's offense. Any type of schematic advantages. And then trends are a big one. Stuck and I tend to mention on the pods all the time, but trend, you would never want to blindly bet on trends, but you can use our Action Labs database, and we do all the time to kind of look at trends. For example, Andy Reid is great off a bye. Mike Tomlin's great as an underdog. And even if you're not going to bet on those trends, what I always like to do is I never like to bet against a trend, unless I really have a big edge in my projected numbers. So I'll usually never bet against the Steelers when they're an underdog, even if I'm not betting on them. And then correlations, NFL, there's so many correlations. So, you want to avoid the ones that are going to hurt you, which a lot of times means don't same game parlay. I tend to like to have one bet per game, because let's say you're betting a side and a total in the same game, for that side to win, you might need them to score another touchdown. But if you had the under, you might not only be able to win 1 out of 2. And that's kind of what the book is counting on. Same thing for a prop in a side or a prop in a total. So I like to kind of avoid correlation and instead try to hit each game on the slate rather than multiple bets in one game. And then, of course, there's key numbers. It's 3 and 7 for spreads. That just means the games are going to land on that the most. So if you're betting an underdog, a 3.5 is worth a lot more than a 3, and a plus 7.5 is worth a lot more than a plus 7. And if you're betting on a favorite, a minus 2.5 is worth a lot more than a minus 3, and a minus 6.5 is worth a lot more than a minus 7. Because again, those are the most common numbers that the games are going to land on. For totals, there's a host of numbers, 41, just kind of all the numbers that scores will kind of add up to. So key numbers very important, because you always when we talk about kind of shopping around getting the best line, if you can get like a half point on and off or off a key number, that's worth more than just a half point. So those are some of the things that I think you have to look out for.
Yeah, that goes back to shopping around, especially it's always important, but especially around key numbers. And yeah, if you can find a 7.5 on an underdog instead of a 7, that's a massive edge right there. But it also should impact the timing of when you're making bets. So I said it's for a recreational bettor, it's in the NFL specifically, it's better to bet early in the week where the market is softer. But if, say, you like a 7.5 point favorite and it's Monday or Tuesday, there's no rush there. I mean, if it goes up to 8, not a huge deal, a little bigger deal than it used to be with more 2-point conversions. But that the chance of it dropping down to 7 and getting a 7 is massive. Wait for that, monitor the market. I find most of my just schematically, I think that there's still some value in cluster injuries, schematic matchups in the trenches. Those are a little more advanced. I think that just having an overarching philosophy of buying low and selling high in the NFL, if you just keep that in mind when you're betting, again, small sample size over the course of the season, it's a league of parity, especially early in the season. Teams are never as good or as bad as they seem on their best and the worst weeks. So, if the team, you can look, just the trends speak to this. Team gets blown out by 40 points and they look awful, especially early in the week before you get the big money coming in. You're probably going to have an overreaction to that result from the week prior. So if you're just buying low, selling high, just keeping that overarching philosophy in mind, you'll be better off than 99% of recreational bettors.
Man, you guys came to play today. Super comprehensive breakdown. And I think probably a key takeaway from that is just you need to establish your own betting model and have a consistent process and not get sort of swayed by narrative and your own biases. So Stuck, jumping off that, in terms of the parity in the NFL, would you say that's one of the unique challenges in addition to the market being so sharp because it is so popular?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to be tough for a recreational bettor to build their own model, especially in, if you want to build like a player prop model and focus on one specific area. If you have the kind of the skills to do that, then there are some opportunities there. But trying to build a model that's just going to beat the market right now from scratch, it's very difficult to do. Plus, in the NFL, I mean, my dog can pretty much tell you around where the line's going to be. So you're talking like fractional edges just from a pure numbers perspective. It's a lot more advanced than that. You can build a basic model and see how you do over time, and then refine it, get better. But it's only going to get more difficult, and the market's only going to get more efficient as more and more advanced models and AI come in to play. But I think that just you can also look. There are only a handful of teams in the NFL compared to college football, college basketball. But if you're first starting out and you want to get better, maybe take a division, take a conference, and really go deep. I mean, people that are doing this recreation have other jobs, so you can't, follow all the teams really in depth like we do. But one of the things I try to do throughout the week is just pick up a little nugget here or there from, beat writers, local podcasts that cover every team. I mean, I'm listening on 2X just throughout the entire week. You listen to an hour to pick out one little nugget, and you say, okay, how does this impact this? Let me take a deeper look at their coverage. So, if you want to, you're not going to have time to do that if you have a life and family. So maybe focus on a division, become, an expert on, a handful of teams within the NFL and start there. But yeah, it's a super efficient market, especially late in the week. And you always have to remember that it's not easy to beat. So the best thing that you can do is avoid all of those pitfalls that most recreational bettors fall into. The chasing, not shopping around, tilting, putting in dumb bets, all of those things are the easiest thing that you can do to just cut out all of the excess losses that you're probably suffering. And then once you're there, that's all the low-hanging fruit that most bettors aren't capturing. So focus on that to start, track, see where you're getting better, find some people that you trust to follow with a proven track record. And then you'll be better off than you have been in prior seasons. And as Raybon has alluded to, and this goes back to buying lists on, don't be afraid of underdogs. Don't be afraid of the ugly teams in the NFL. Shop around, be aware of those key numbers, and attack the softer markets like props, even some of your Wong teasers, your 6-point teasers across key numbers, and do it early in the week. But always be cognizant of those key numbers.
Yeah, it's like to piggyback on Stuckey's point with the, creating your own model. That's going to be really tough if you're just starting out. And as Stuckey said, you're probably talking about a fraction of a point, and you're going to spend so much time trying to get the basic model right. So I just think, like Stuckey and I, we create models because we've been doing this our whole life. We want to be able to quantify the little edges that we see. But if you're just starting out, I say focus on the edges, because remember the NFL, you score in 6s and 7s and 3s, and so any little edge is going to be worth a lot more than trying to get the exact like baseline number right to like a half a point or a point. So like, if you want to focus on a specific type of edge, that could be your thing. Like maybe you're the guy who just, or the guy or gal who just focuses on offensive line injuries, because, when team centers are out, they tend to struggle. When the left tackle, especially, or the blindside tackle is out, teams tend to struggle. So maybe you just focus on injuries. Maybe you focus on pressure. That's something I do a lot. Like I'm always focused on the pressure matchup for every matchup. And that's a lot of my bets are just, okay, I think this team is going to struggle. This quarterback's going to struggle under pressure more than is implied by the line. So Stuckey, he's really good with betting on teams coming off ugly performances, like essentially buying low. Like he said, a team comes off a blowout. Sometimes if you look at the trends for that team the next week, teams off a 20-point blowout or things like that, they usually hit 60+% of the time. So you can kind of focus on whatever edge that you feel like you have a good grip on, and that will be a lot more valuable than feeling like you have to first get exactly, get that baseline exactly right. Like that's something that we do because we want to be able to be exact, and we want to be able to give you the exact numbers and tell you exactly where to bet a line to and things like that. But if you're just starting out, just focus on the edges, because the standard deviation is going to be so much higher for those little edges than it's going to be for, getting a line, projecting a line within a point or two. And then you're still going to have to make the adjustments that are going to actually give you the edge. So focus on the edges. I would say that's kind of the shortcut. And if you're tracking what you're doing, you're going to kind of get the hang of it over time, even if it doesn't work out, the first few times.
Right. This is all kind of a lot to take in, which is why, again, following folks that already put the work in, like yourselves, who have betting models, I mean, that's going to be the real key to starting out and then sort of developing your own process for those edges. And to that end, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to Stuckey's dog having an account in the Action app, because his betting model or her betting model might be halfway decent. So look, we've talked about some of the challenges. Stuckey also mentioned some of the tools and resources that maybe we should have to refer to in our toolkit, such as certain accounts to follow. Was there anything else you wanted to add there, Stuckey, as far as just like data points that you really need to know, or any other like tools?
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting really advanced, there's lots of things that you can scrape to pull into models. There's lots of resources there in that aspect. There's tons of sites too, like PFF they're going to grade every player. You have sites like SIS that you're going to look at schemes and how some quarterbacks do against zone and man, what defensive schemes certain teams are playing. And, so there's a ton. I mean, they're going to cost you money. And also other people are buying them. So be aware that it's public. I think that you can be aware that there are some limitations in those. Like I think PFF does a great job, but I think that there's some flaws in how they grade cornerbacks and secondaries in general. So there you can potentially find some edges if you can find a way that you disagree with some of these public resources out there. Tons of beat writers. I mean, NFL is covered so in depth. Also, just you go to, there's we have a bot that's going to tweet out all the updates, a bot account from every single beat writer in the NFL. I always retweet it during the season. But you can follow, there's even local podcasts for every team. There's multiple. You can find some really, really good, smart people that are covering teams. And they might not be great at betting, but you can find little nuggets here and there because they're so entrenched in following their team. They're living, dying, breathing on their one team. And then they're going to try and summarize it in a couple hours a week. So if you have the time, and again, if you don't, this is why you want to focus maybe on a couple teams. There's a lot of great resources out. It's just trying to find, okay. And then there's podcasts, there's articles. You want to really, it's up to, it's going to be, you have to personalize it based on the amount of time that you have to spend on this during the week based on all of your other obligations. So you want to just, try and see what's out there, give a lot of different things a chance, and then find, okay, what's the best balance of what do I need to listen to? Who do I trust? Who has a proven track record? But yeah, there's so many different resources out there. There's a lot of sites out there where you can get very analytical. And then there's also just great podcasts, locally focused, generally focused. So there's an unlimited amount of resources because the NFL is covered so in depth. It's just a matter of finding the right balance, which works for your life. And that's a constant, that's a process that I refine every single season, every single week. It's like, okay, I'm not really finding too much value from listening to this podcast. Oh, this person's writing some interesting things. I'm going to check them out. So it's not a thing where you just figure it out once. It's a constant changing, evolving process.
Cool. Raybon, any other resources that you specifically wanted to tack onto that?
Yeah, I think the Action app, first and foremost, even if I did not work here, I swear I would use this app every day when I bet, because not only can you view all the lines at all the books and kind of customize it to whatever books you have, but you can also look at the amount of money and bets on each team. You can set alerts for when a line hits maybe you're waiting for a line that's +7 to get to 7.5. You can get an alert when it does. You can get an alert, when a game is about to start or just anything like that. So, and of course you can get alerts when I post a pick or Stuckey post a pick or Sean Kerner post a pick or anybody that you choose. So, I think the app is very crucial, and you can also track all your bets, and you can even put, 0 units if you want to just track those bets that, you were thinking about, but didn't want to actually place. So I think that's the number one thing. And then as Stuckey said, Football Outsiders, PFF, Sports Info Solutions, Pro Football Reference is one I don't think we mentioned yet. That's a good one to just pull in, all the basic NFL team and player stats. I always work in game logs because that helps me, let's say I'm trying to see what a team looks like with a certain player out for a number of games. I can just kind of filter for the game logs that he's out versus the game logs that he played and things like that. So I always import all team and player game logs into a spreadsheet. Again, that's if you're going the data route. The Athletic is a really good source. It's subscription, but I find their beat writers are a little bit above some of the rest. So I always kind of check out them for what Stuckey mentioned. They're going to have that expert knowledge of their team. And a lot of times when you talk about finding an edge, a lot of times it'll be something that I read from a beat writer that inspires me, like looking deeper into an edge that I end up finding. So maybe a beat writer will mention a certain scheme or a certain, thing that a certain player or unit on the team is good or bad at. And you kind of dig deeper into that. That might be your edge. So don't underestimate that. Don't just look for betting content, because what's going to happen is if you try to over consume only betting content, you're going to eventually run into a situation where Stuckey and I are on the Chiefs, and this other person that you follow is on the opposite side. They're on the Lions or something like that. So, you want to get it to where you're not just, like kind of running in circles with all these picks from everybody, and you're back at square one again. And also, Maria, you asked about the challenges to the NFL earlier. I think one of the big ones that we haven't fully mentioned is that it's not just parity, and it's not just that there's a lot of luck in the NFL. It's that the schedule is very limited. So a lot of times you're going to be able to find an edge by schedule adjusting numbers. And that's why I think Football Outsiders is a great resource for people that don't necessarily want to build their own models, because DVOA is schedule adjusted and it's offense, defense, special teams. So a lot of times you could just look at that and get a much better idea. And those numbers won't necessarily match like the market all the time. Like I remember last season, the Giants-Vikings game, DVOA had the Vikings as like a bottom 5 or bottom 16 overall. And I'm like, how is this team even favored right now, much less favored by more than a field goal? I was like, Giants are the better team. And that was something like I had other reasons and a lot of points for feeling like that, but I could have just gone straight to DVOA and said, look, the Vikings are like 26 and the Giants are 21st. Giants are the better team. Home field advantage isn't worth, 5 points or whatever they were giving the Vikings. So that's crucial, for I think a novice, even if you're not creating a model or anything, just being able to look at a schedule adjusted metric, because remember, you're only playing 14 unique opponents in a season. So, that's less than half the league. So a lot of times you're going to get an edge because the team looks like one way, 1 week, and then next week, whole different opponent. They look completely different. And you're going to get an edge that way. So be aware of the strength of schedule adjustments and things like that. And I think Football Outsiders is a great one for that.
So much great advice here on the Experts Guide to Betting NFL on the Action Network podcast. We do have just a few more things we want to touch on before we wrap up. And one of them was teased at the beginning of the show. That's the NFL offseason and preseason. Stuckey, you indicated you're not a big fan of, doing too much in the preseason, but I guess Raybon, I'll start with you. Like, what do you need to just stay on top of during the NFL offseason? What are you doing right now to prep for the season?
Well, one of the key things, and this is for, I would say, intermediate to advanced, but I think this is where even a lot of people that do make their models or some kind of model and kind of know what they're doing, they still get this wrong. So you have to incorporate prior season data into your ratings or rankings or whatever you're using. So I know a lot of quote unquote sharp bettors that say, oh, I'm not even going to bet to week 5 because I want to get, 4 weeks of data in. But it's like, no, like you don't need 4 weeks of Patrick Mahomes quarterbacking the Chiefs offense to give you information about, the Chiefs offense. You have like 5 seasons of that. So you just have to know how much to use of that and how much to regress to the mean. And that's where, modeling comes in and you run your regressions and different things like that. But
plus the entire market will have 4 weeks of data. I mean, you're not like
exactly. Yeah. Oh. So it's like a big thing that I do is I'm always using some form of prior data. Now that changes for different stats. Like for example, turnovers are like very random. So like when I'm projecting a quarterback's interception rate, I might have to use his entire career because, it doesn't even get to like 50-50, 50% regression, 50% actual stat until about 1,700 pass attempts, which is like 4 or 5 seasons for most quarterbacks. Whereas you might have like a stat like yards per attempt, which is, it stabilizes a lot quicker. So you could throw out a lot of the older stuff. You want to look at the more recent stuff because obviously that depends on, the receivers and the O-line and things like that. A little more current. So you do want to, draw upon prior season data. So that's what I'm doing is I'm kind of updating my ratings for, as I'm going into week 1, it's like, okay, it doesn't just pick up where it left off last season because a lot of time has passed. So you're going to like apply a little bit of regression because there's going to be a little randomness with, guys aging and things changing and roster turnover, but you do want to incorporate past season data. And I do think that's an edge even over some of the sharper bettors and groups that a lot of times are just using a lot more current season data, which is going to be a lot more volatile because 16 games is just not enough. For example, a lot of stats take more than 16 games to even hit 50% skill, 50% luck, or 50% regression, 50% true stats. So you just kind of that's one thing I think is big. Another thing, if you're betting totals,
yeah,
Pro Football Reference has a page called NFL League Averages. It goes year by year, just gives you the averages for everything, pass attempts, points, all these different things. Check on those and update those assumptions, because, like, for example, in 2020, when there was no the crowd wasn't as much of a factor,
right,
we saw scoring go up. Then the last couple of years, they changed the penalty rules a little, and we saw things change with that. Scoring. When they changed the offensive holding rules, they changed the kickoff touchback rules at 5 extra yards. If you're doing like a point per yard model, that's something you need to know, because now the field position is going to be a little different. So things like that, when you're betting totals, knowing the league averages and updating those are crucial, because they are changing ever so slightly. And when you're talking about, a point here, half a point there for a total, that could add up very quickly. So I think that's really important. And again, also the home field advantage, that's something where it's been changing it's been dwindling for the most part over these last 5 to 10 years. So that's also something where you can just go in Pro Football Reference, import the game logs for all the games of last season and just look at the home team point differential versus the road team. Or they even have a app called StatHead on Pro Football Reference. I believe it's subscription based, but you could just kind of do the math for you. Just look at all the home teams and their point differentials, but you want to keep, be aware of the home field advantage. And then, it's different for different teams. So if you want to go back, you can actually look at, data going further back to kind of get it for different teams, because a lot of times when you look at a line and you don't understand exactly why it is, it might be, okay, well, Kansas City, Green Bay, they have New Orleans, they have bigger home field advantages than a team like Cincinnati, for example, or the Chargers. And sometimes when, like, this is just a tip that people forget, but, like, let's say the Browns are playing the Bengals, like, they're both in Ohio. There's really no home field advantage to speak of either way. So, things like that, you always want to keep in mind. But yeah, in the offseason, I think it's updating league averages. If there's any rule changes, trying to account for those with how you think the league average could change, and kind of just reviewing the home field advantage and using the last season's, like, updating last season's numbers and prior season numbers into a rating for the current season if you're doing, like, advanced modeling.
Yeah, that's what I'm spending my entire off season doing. You have your end of season power ratings from last year. Then you go back and you want to analyze them. Okay, where was I off on a team? Do I want to look a little deeper and then be comfortable with where my model and where basically where the league stands at the end of last season? And then you're adjusting them for age, free agency, trades, draft, coaching changes. And then you want to get comfortable with where your starting point is for this coming season. And then, as Raybon alluded to, those are basically your adjusted prior numbers. And then as the season goes on, you want to continue to use them, but you kind of reduce the amount that you're using them over time as you get more data, so your priors will not mean as much, kind of a blended power rating, in week 10 as they do in week 1. When it comes to preseason, and I'll just set up Raybon here, because the market is softer. It's a sharp bettors. Sharps can make a ton of money betting preseason. It's a lot softer, a lot more inefficient, because if you have a really good, this goes back to props too. If you have a really good player, there's a lot of correlation there. If you have a really good player prop model, you can beat the market. Now, the limits aren't going to be ridiculous, and that's one of the reasons why you can beat it. But preseason's all about figuring out who's going to play and how much, and that could come down to props or the spread. There's also coaching that matters. Like the Ravens, who have a lot of depth and a really good coaching staff, which is why they always cover. But preseason is all about just figuring out who's going to play and for how long. Right. And then if you can model that right, you can beat preseason, just like you can beat player props during the regular season.
And one thing, sorry to cut you off. I was going to say one thing that we haven't even said yet that we should probably get out there. Whether you're modeling or not, people should just know this. And we take it for granted, but the passing game is about 4 to 6 times more valuable than the run game. when you're projecting like point differential, for example. It'll change depending what metrics you're using. Like, some people might just, if you compare like yards per or net yards per pass attempt to yards per rushing attempt, you're going to see a 4 to 6x correlation there for passing. So in general, when you talk about players that are most valuable to the spread, quarterbacks are the only players that are usually going to even be worth more than a point. Occasionally, you have like maybe a stud wide receiver that, if he were out, his replacement is bad enough that it would affect, a team's projected yards per attempt or whatever metric you're using, to the point where they'd get up to a point. But usually quarterbacks are worth much more than any other player to the spread, to the point that, you can kind of have your own spread value for quarterbacks. And Sean Kerner is really good at this. And he usually publishes them each year, but I that's how I kind of look at betting too. When I'm doing my models, like I have a different, like, it's not just team stats. I have a different projection for each starting quarterback. So, okay, if this quarterback starts, this is, how many yards per attempt he's going to average. This is how many, touchdowns he would throw versus a league average opponent, things like that. So quarterbacks and the passing game is massive. So when you are looking for your edges, and this goes into preseason, look at the quarterback first. So in the preseason, a lot of times, especially if you're paying attention to the beat writers and things like that, you're going to know the general plan for the team for each game. You could just kind of look at the depth chart and figure it out, even if you're not like deep in beat reports, because, first week, the third strings play the most, second week, second stringers, third week, the first stringers play the most. So just by being familiar with some of these quarterbacks and the ones that are going to get the most time, you can kind of figure out, what a preseason line should be or who has the edge. And that's a big edge because not a lot of people are going to be able to differentiate between like, a Kyle Slaughter and a Sam Howell and a Tyler Huntley, but if you can, then you have a massive edge betting preseason. So, but you definitely want to always pay attention to the passing game. The run game is just because, you're talking about like the best teams are 5 yards a carry, the worst teams are 3 yards a carry. There's just not as much spread. It's not going, and because you're eventually going to get into a situation where you have to throw for a first down, passing is just going to be worth a lot more correlation wise to point differential, point scoring, and all of those things.
Very good to know. And since Stuckey brought up prop betting, Raybon, can you just briefly explain your approach to props in the NFL?
Yeah, so for props, you're essentially, it's the same principle. You're trying to figure out what you think the true line should be, and then you're looking for, instances where the book has it off. So what I do is I'm already projecting all the teams for betting. So I'm projecting not just, point differential and all that. I'm projecting, passing yards, pass attempts, rushing yards, all those things on a team level. And then I get, I from there, I do a top-down approach. So then I, using like for receivers, I use targets per route run. So I project snaps and routes. And then I'm just kind of projecting the yards and things that way. But I would say the prop market, if you don't want to go deep into the modeling aspects and the stat aspects, it's the same as the sides and the totals market. Bet unders, because what's going to happen is the majority, and even more so than sides and totals, the majority of bettors bet props over, because they'll look and say, oh, this guy has a good matchup. Boom. Like there's not a lot of people saying, oh, this guy's like matchup isn't great, or he's just projected, a little bit too high, because the books are usually going to post these numbers a little too high to account for the fact that people almost always bet overs. I'm talking about like sometimes there'll be like 99% of the bets on a prop will be over. So if you can do nothing, just target unders. I generally look at receiving yards first, because those are going to be the most volatile. Like passing yardage is a lot more, kind of stable and predictable. And it's going to depend a lot more on game script and things like that. But individual receivers, sometimes, like let's say other receivers have a good matchup on his team, there's going to be somebody that's not going to hit his prop if they're all projected at their medians. Same thing for a guy with a tough matchup. Things like that. If a team blitzes a lot, a running back may have to stay in to block, so he may not go out in the route as much, which means not as many receiving yards or receptions, things like that. So I generally target receiving props, especially receiving yards, and target unders. I would say receiving yards, is the best, then receptions, then rushing yards, and then carries. Those are the 4 props I tend to target the most, and it's about 99% unders. The only time I usually consider an over if it's like early in the season and maybe a rookie hasn't broke out yet. And you project him for, to essentially play starter snaps and the books are being conservative. I might bet an over there, but if you just do nothing but bet prop unders, you'll be having a good time. You'll be having a good season.
Amazing. Just a few more points we want to cover here before we go. Stuckey, let's get a little granular with it. Could you just describe an ideal betting opportunity for you personally heading into an NFL game?
Yeah, I'll use a real world example from my biggest win that I've ever had was November 2019. The Patriots, I think, were 8-0, and the Ravens were, I think, 5-2, coming off of a bye at home. It was, I think, it was a Sunday night or Monday night game, but the Patriots were, yes, 8-0 with Tom Brady, Belichick. They have the market name recognition, but they were a fraudulent 8-0. I mean, the turnover luck was extreme. They played a bunch of backups. They had holes in their defense, and they were just ripe for the picking. So this is buying low, so selling high on the Patriots. The Ravens were also coming off a bye. Harbaugh, great staff, amazing off the bye. One of the coaches that I actually give a significant bump for. And this line and the matchup, the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, heavy rush attack. The Patriots run defense was extremely vulnerable if you kind of looked under the hood a bit. And so this kind of hits everything. And then this line came out the week before. I think it opened at like 6, which was insane. Immediately got bet, came down, and then kept coming down. I think it closed at like 3. Later in the season, the Ravens would have been favored in the spot. And the Ravens, I think, were up by like 21 at one point. I think they won by 14 or 17. So this had everything. This was selling high, kind of getting under the hood of a team, the matchup, betting early in the week, shopping around, beating the market. You kind of got a coaching angle, schedule angle in there. And that's kind of one of my biggest win ever in the NFL, and kind of hit all of the things that I'm looking for at once.
That is super thrilling. We're going to get Raybon's ultimate thrill betting an NFL game as well. But first, I just want to touch on live betting. Raybon, any thoughts on live betting NFL or best practices there?
Yeah, the first thing is I would say limit your unit size. So the same way I mentioned, you don't want to have too much exposure to one game pregame. You also don't want to have too much exposure to a game live, especially because that's when all those biases that Stuckey talked about, those tend to come out. You start chasing or you get overconfident. So I generally would say have a plan going in. Like, for example, maybe you like an underdog, but they haven't moved off 7, and you figure, hey, if the other team scores first, that line's going to go to probably 10 and a half, maybe even more if they score a touchdown. So kind of just looking for a bet that you would already feel comfortable pregame, but trying to get a better number if like a certain event happens, like the other, the opposite side scoring first, or if you're betting an under, maybe teams, the score a little higher than you expected in the first quarter, things like that. That's generally my approach, and I would generally restrict it to like a half unit if I'm usually betting full units on games pregame, because you just want to be careful. There's more variance, and also a lot of times books are juicing up these in-game live lines. So, usually a standard bet is -110 if you're betting a side or a total, but to bet that same side in game, it might be -115, -120. So you're already losing some of the edge there. So you really want to be careful with that. But the only other times I really would suggest going in on a live bet is if a key player gets injured. And a lot of times these live lines are algorithm based, and so if Tyreek Hill goes down or Tua Tagovailoa, that the line might not necessarily reflect that at least immediately. So if you can get that bet in quick on the opposite team, you're gonna be in a plus EV situation. But that's basically the The only time I kind of go without having a plan going in is if just a key player gets hurt in game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is for recreational bettors. So you can, I think, for the most part, recreational bettors can get themselves in more trouble betting live. And there's also delays, from what you're seeing to when you're actually get your bet in if it is accepted. So yeah, but I think that I was going to say the same thing. Have a plan. So if you liked an underdog and it was, sitting at 6.5 all week and never got to that 7, you wanted the 7, that's okay. Don't force your bet. You have a sweat in and of itself saying, oh, maybe I'll get a better number. Let's root for the other team to score first, and then I'll get my better number. And you go into the game saying, I want this underdog at 7+. And then, adjust it based on what you're seeing. You might say, oh, you know what? I don't like what I saw on that first drive. But I think having a plan going in, and then of course shop around. You could see even more variance in different lines that are offered. And again, keep key numbers in mind when it comes to live betting. But I would agree with that advice.
And before, sorry, I was going to say, just to add on to that, like before you place a live bet, I would recommend, like, it usually works best with an island game or game where you're just watching that one game, whatever game that may be, but just keep your app open or whatever sites or books you bet on, and just watch the live line change as things happen in the game. So like, there'll be times where no one's scoring and time is passing. Watch how the live line changes. There'll be times when a team goes and scores a touchdown on a drive. How does the line change? So just kind of get an idea of how the line moves and where you think you see the edges are first. And then you'll be a lot more prepared, when you're actually looking for something specific going forward. But I think it's always a good idea to just get an idea of how the line moves. Because again, it's all algorithm based. The books are going to start with the pregame line or whatever they thought was the true line for the pregame line. And then it's probably going to be some type of like points per drive, EPA type of situation where, if it's like 3rd and 10 in field goal range, there's probably going to be like three expected points that the line is probably going to go toward that way. And then, if a team has like 1st and goal, the line's going to be a lot closer to, that full 6 or 7. So it's like just kind of getting an idea of how the books are moving lines with all the different situations and likelihoods of a team scoring. So I think that's pretty key. And you can also, if you have Action Labs, a great tool. I use it every week. It can save trends for you and things like that. But Action Labs has a second half filter, so you can build trends specifically for second halves of games. So, for example, let's say a favorite of double digits is down by double digits at the half. That might be a good time to bet that favorite in the second half, or it might be a good time to fade them because everyone thinks that the team is going to come back. But either way, Action Labs will tell you, what the trend is and what the optimal way to go about that is, and it'll give you an alert if it applies to the specific game. To any specific game. So like you can get an alert if you're watching Chiefs Lions and it's like, okay, bet the Lions in the second half because of X, Y, and Z. Action Labs will give you an alert on your phone, on your email, all that stuff. And then you can go bet that. And it's the same thing as betting like a live line for the game. It's just, betting based on the second half, but at least there's like you're betting during like a break where you can kind of calibrate and make a smarter bet. So that's another thing to consider as well.
All right. This has been nearly an hour-long masterclass on betting the NFL. Let's end with this. Stuckey already shared his biggest win ever, November 2019. Pat's taken on the Ravens. Raybon, what has been your ultimate thrill betting the NFL?
I think it was the year Cam Newton was the last year Cam Newton was quarterback in the Patriots. They were facing the Rams. I think it was a Thursday night game, but I just remember thinking like, there's no way this dude Cam Newton like gets passing yards in this game. Like there's going to be too much pressure. They have no receivers. So I just banged like every Cam Newton under, like attempts, passing yards, like everything. And he got benched, I believe. He got benched like in the first or second quarter. He was terrible. So like that was really fun. Or maybe just that Ray McLeod under half a yard. Those are always fun as well. But as far as like a multi-bet win, the Cam Newton one sticks out because it's always great when you bet a quarterback under and he gets benched. That is like the ultimate. That's the ultimate.
Remember to bet those unders. Chris, Raybon, and Stuckey, thank you so much for taking me to school. Truly super, super fun time. Once again, I'm Maria Marino. Be sure to look out for future Experts Guide episodes on fantasy football and player props coming soon. And if you haven't already, check out our other Experts Guide to Betting episodes for NBA, NHL, MLB, European soccer, and UFC right here on the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel.